Okay. All right, sounds good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shweta Arya. I'm the Executive Director of Delaware Interfaith Power and Light. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I would like to welcome you to our Climate Conversation program. Thank you so much for taking this time out this evening. And before we start, if you could all put yourself on mute during the time of the presentation, we will have some time at the end for Q&A session, and that time you can unmute yourself to ask questions. So very delighted to have you all here. We have really good speakers who can share some insightful information with you all. I'm excited to learn as well. So before we get started, I know there are some people who have been to our climate conversations before and they know about Delaware IPL. But I just want to give you a little bit of info about IPL's work, and I promise I'll just take a few minutes. So Delaware IPL, we are a faith-based environmental nonprofit. We have been around over a decade here in Delaware, working with interfaith communities and community stakeholders in addressing the biggest humanitarian crisis our planet is facing today, that is climate change. So how we work is, through our programs, we help congregations to reduce their carbon footprint. Then we create opportunities such as this, doing climate conversations and creating educational resources for our congregations to use as well, creating awareness about what climate change is, how it is hurting us, and why we need to really mobilize ourselves, not only as individuals, but our communities to act on climate change. We are running short on time, as 99% of the scientist community is telling us that we need to act on climate and act on climate right now. If we need to preserve a livable future for our children and our grandchildren. And lastly, we act on climate policy. We want to advance Delaware to have a really progressive and bold climate policy where we can get to a carbon-free future by 2050. That is the need for the hour, and we organize our faith communities to do just that. So I'll step back now just for Climate Conversations. Climate Conversation program was started in 2018. It is funded by Energize Delaware, and we are very, very thankful for Energize Delaware's funding for this program and many other programs that we do. You can check out Energize Delaware, www.energizedelaware.org. They really do a wonderful job of bringing not only financial tools, but other information to our residences, nonprofits, and businesses so that they can become climate resilient and energy efficient. So please do check them out. We have done over 50 of these climate dialogues online and in person, creating awareness about climate change. Today, I'm excited. We have never done this topic before at any of our climate conversations, but this is really, really an important topic. We know that 77%, DENREC did a survey not too long ago, which said that 77% of Delawareans are concerned and alarmed about climate change. 2 out of 3 Americans are worried about global warming. American voters, including voters of faith, overwhelmingly support policies to protect our communities. So it is really, really important as faith communities work towards, protecting our sacred earth. We really can ask our communities of faith to, when they go out and vote, to keep climate in mind. And today we'll discuss just that. And I, without any further ado, would like to call our first speaker. And I'll start with Mike Kennedy. He's a Faith Climate Justice Voter Campaign Manager. at Interfaith Power and Light. So Delaware IPL is one of the 40 state affiliates of national organization, and Mike is coming from the national. And Interfaith Power and Light, you can check out the resources of the national website. They have really great resources for faith communities to use to, and I'll let Mike take over and talk about that. So Mike, floor is all yours, and I will stop sharing my screen now if I can get to it.
Thank you so much, Shweta, and it is great to be with all of you this evening. I'm here to share with you about Interfaith Power and Light's Faith Climate Justice Voter Campaign. Just want to tell you about what it is and why we do it, and then share some specific ways that you and your faith communities can participate in the work. So our campaign is a nonpartisan campaign. It's focused on engaging and mobilizing faith voters to communicate their values, to communicate our values of caring for our sacred earth and loving our neighbors through the critical climate action of voting. You know, if we hope to continue making progress to address climate change at the scale that our communities need, we need elected officials who have the moral courage to act on climate and pass policies at every single level of government. And climate and democracy are interconnected. We've got to ensure that everyone can participate in our democracy and that everyone has fair and equitable access to the ballot. So this election, like all elections, is about the values shaping our future. Together, we can express our values of ensuring a livable planet for our children and that everyone is cared for. Simply put, we can join together to vote our values and make a difference. And so that's why Interfaith Power and Light is working to increase faith voter turnout in elections and inspire them to vote their values of climate justice. Shweta spoke to this. Millions of Americans of faith care about climate change and justice, but too many of them are unlikely to vote in November. So we know that if we can connect those voters to their values, we can turn a lot of them out to vote. But in order to do that, we need folks like you and your faith communities to get involved in the campaign. So with that said, let me share my screen and share some specific ways that you can participate. All right, can you all see my my screen? Is it the Faith Climate Justice Voter slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I've had some issues with my two screens today, so I'm glad you can see that. Just give me 1 second. All right, so I'm going to share with you 5 ways that you all could plug into the 2022 campaign. They are as a congregation captain, registering voters, asking voters to do a pledge, sharing a voter guide with them, and then sending text messages to faith voters once we get closer to the election. The first and key way to get involved is to sign up as a congregation captain. By the way, I am going to mention some links and show some links. As soon as I'm done in just a couple minutes, I will share all of these links with you in the chat. So don't feel like you need to capture them right now. But a big part of our campaign is inviting folks to serve as congregation captains, where they serve as a lead for their faith community in the campaign. When folks sign up as a congregation captain, they immediately receive a very simple toolkit with a menu of actions that their faith community can take. And they also receive staff support. For those of you in Delaware, and we've had a couple folks in Delaware sign up as captains already, I am the person who will support you. And we send this toolkit, and I'll outline these tactics here in just a moment. We don't expect folks to do all of them, We encourage you to discern what you and your community are feeling called to do and pick the one or two or three that make the most sense for your local community. And you can do this as a captain, or you can do some of these not as a captain. But when you sign up as a captain, you're immediately going to get all those resources that I mentioned. The next way to get involved is around voter registration. Tomorrow, September 20th, is National Voter Registration Day. We have partnered with a national organization called When We All Vote to provide a voter registration portal for people to visit. And they can do that in a number of ways. They can go to that website that you see in the bottom right corner of the screen. They can also scan that QR code. There's also a flyer that's in the toolkit, and it takes people to a site where they can check their registration. And if applicable, they can actually register to vote. For those of us who are experienced voters, you might ask, well, why should I check my voter registration? Well, things change. We may have moved, we may have turned 18. And unfortunately, in a lot of states, voters who are registered have been purged from the voter rolls. So this tool allows folks to double check that they are in fact still registered. So that's a big part of what we're doing. Next is our multi-issue Faithful Voter Reflection Guide. We encourage people to download the guide and share the guide. And so folks working on the campaign can encourage folks to visit the site and download again, a nonpartisan multi-issue voter reflection guide. We call it a reflection guide because it's designed to ask people to do that. It's got reflection questions for individuals. And if you feel like going to a candidate's event, it's got a suggested question or two that you can ask a candidate at a public event. We also are inviting people to pledge to be a faith, climate, justice voter. I'm going to just pause for 10 seconds so you all can read that pledge. If you haven't already, we encourage you to take that pledge if you feel led to do so and to share it with other folks. And then the last tactic that I want to share is this. Starting in October, we are going to hold text banks on Zoom, and we are going to text voters of faith to encourage them to go out and vote. Why do we do this? Well, we know that it works for a number. Back in 2020 in our voter campaign, we did text banks. We paired it with a research experiment to measure if what we were doing actually worked. And the good news is it does work. Our texting campaign increased voter turnout of those who we contacted by almost 2%. Now, 2% might not sound like a lot, 1.7%, I was rounding. But that is 3 times the national average benchmark of similar get out the vote communication. So people receiving messages on their text messages on their cell phone is an effective way to get to have a conversation with folks, because that's where so many of us are. We're on our cell phones. We don't answer the door that much anymore for a canvasser. We don't answer a phone call from a phone banker. So here's who we text. This year, and folks from around the country, including you in Delaware, can join us in this work. We're focused on 3 states, Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those are key states where climate is important to be part of the conversation around elections. And we send text messages to voters of faith who don't vote often or at all, and who we know are alarmed by climate. So it's just not random text messaging. We are able to target our text message to those voters of faith who don't vote often at all, and who are alarmed by climate. And again, we hold these text banks on Zoom where you come and get quick training on, you don't send these messages from your personal cell phone and your personal number. You send them through a very easy to use website that we provide. And it allows you to have some meaningful conversations with voter So I will stop there. That's just a snapshot of the main ways that folks can plug into the campaign. Again, I'm really grateful to Shweta and Delaware Interfaith Power and Light for the opportunity to come share with you about this. And like I said, I'll drop all those links in the chat momentarily.
Thank you so much, Mike. And now, and you know, I mean, I love that you had given such like 4 or 5 options for people to get involved in. And sometimes we also know that, you know, we can use voting banks from places like Delaware for PA. I'm actually a Pennsylvania resident, and I, you know, I participate in the text banks all the time. I do that for Pennsylvania, but you know, people are welcome to do it for other states if they feel that, you know, their own states are safe. So thank you, very well said. And you know, global warming, climate change is definitely a voting issue. It impacts everything that we care for us, our families, future generation, our job stability, food insecurity. Everything that we care about is threatened by climate change. So let's make that a voting issue. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite our next speaker, Mira Debota from ACLU Delaware. Mira, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Shweta. Hello, everybody. As Shweta just said, my name is Mira Debota. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the voting campaign manager at the ACLU of Delaware. I'll keep my comments brief, and then hopefully if you have questions at the end, I'll be able to speak more directly to those. But as the voting campaign manager at the ACLU, my job is really just to make sure that people are able to cast their ballots confidently. Similarly to Mike, the ACLU voter campaign does not endorse or oppose candidates. Our mission is simply to make sure that every voter has the information that they need to make an educated vote, to make them feel confident when they cast their ballots. I'm in no way the most knowledgeable person on the subject matter or even close to it before coming into this position. I was a teacher for 3 years, and I say all that just to make it very clear that oftentimes people feel like they might need 3 degrees and 50 years of experience to speak about issues like voter suppression or speak about the importance of the vote. And that's, you know, simply not true. For me, as a woman of color, as a first-generation American, my experience is inherently political, and that gives me the authority to speak on these subject matters, just like all of you have your own individual experiences and relationships with whatever, you know, political state you live in, and that also gives you the authority to speak on this as well. So often we think of voter suppression as gerrymandered districts or super long lines at the polling place, but one of the most common ways that votes are suppressed across the United States is simply by making people feel like they don't know enough to speak on the conversation or to participate in elections or to be part of the decision-making process that directly impacts conversations like climate change. And by counting yourself out of that process or out of that vote because you don't think you know enough, you're sacrificing your voice. And as Mike so eloquently said earlier, all we really want you to do is vote based on your values, whether it's climate change, whether it's reproductive freedom, whether it's immigrants' rights. If you're passionate about a subject, if you value a subject, then your vote matters, regardless of what you feel like you know or you don't. So whether this is your first time or your 100th time being part of this conversation, I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that you are looking to participate or have already participated, and that hopefully you are getting your communities involved as well. Moreover, I would really like to encourage you to do just that, to mobilize your communities. So for myself as an Asian American, I'm severely underrepresented in the political realm, and all of you may have identities within yourself that are also not represented. And participating in the election is a way to change that. You know, voting in no sense of the word is a solution. It's not the be all and end all. It's not going to solve every issue that we face, but it's a step towards that eventual goal. And a really important point for me throughout this campaign is not to give in to shame or guilt. You know, when you're speaking to your communities, when you're speaking to your family members, to your friends, encouraging them to vote, it's easy to kind of give into that narrative of guilting people into voting or shaming them and being like, oh, you didn't vote, so you have no right to complain. And that only works to further isolate communities who are already being pushed away from the ballot box. So rephrasing and reimagining what we think of as voter education away from those narratives and rather engaging in conversations like, why don't you feel like you're represented here? What's stopping you from casting your ballot? Is it a lack of accessible information? Is it a lack of feeling like your vote actually correlates into changes that you see? Opening conversations like that, or like Mike said, opening conversations based on an issue matter. So, you know, what's the issue that you really are passionate about this election season? Is it climate change? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how the candidates on your ballot will directly impact that issue. That's a far better, more impactful way to engage your community rather than directly diving into narratives of like, oh, you didn't vote, so thugs. So that's just definitely an important part of the campaign as well. Living in a state like Delaware, and I'm not sure if all of you are tuning in from Delaware or from your home states, but because my campaign is Delaware specific, I'm going to speak to it, but this is relevant, you know, all over the country. But specifically in Delaware, you know, voter suppression efforts seem really far away. We don't see super long lines at the polls. We don't necessarily always see polling places get shut down. But there are many other ways that our state continues to make voting more difficult than it needs to be, specifically for communities of color, specifically for low-income communities, communities that might move a lot, communities who are disenfranchised by the justice system. And that might be things like voter registration deadlines. So now I'm going to kind of transition and talk to you about a few changes that you're seeing this year. Mike gave you a few ways to get involved. And so hopefully I can give you some more information now on how you can actually cast your ballot. So up until this year, Delaware actually had one of the harshest registration deadlines across the country, making people register more than 25 days in advance of the election and making party change deadlines happen in May, which nobody is thinking about the election. The average citizen is not thinking about the election 25 days out from it. Lives are really busy, jobs are busy, families are busy. And so while that might not seem like a suppressive effort, arbitrary deadlines are actually one of the #1 causes of a lack of voter participation. So this year we are celebrating a great voting rights victory in Delaware by introducing same-day registration. Same-day registration essentially eliminates voter registration deadlines in Delaware and allows all eligible voters residing within Delaware to register to vote and cast their ballot on the same day. And this includes Election Day and the early voting period. All you need to do is show up at your designated polling site, whether that be an early voting polling site or an election day polling site. Bring a form of ID, and remember, Delaware does not have photo ID laws. You can bring something like a utility bill, for example. So if anyone at the polls tells you you need a photo ID, they are absolutely wrong. Contact a poll worker or the election protection helpline. And you can finish your registration right on the spot and cast your ballot. That opens up so many doors for voters who may have moved after the original registration deadline, voters who may have gained citizenship after that deadline. It might be new voters, voters who are really just engaging in the voting process for the first time. So this is an incredible win. This opens up access to the ballot for so many communities who are disenfranchised by arbitrary deadlines. And I would just ask for your help in spreading that message and telling people in your communities that this might be helpful or impactful to them. Or, you know, if they wake up on the morning of election day and realize, you know, I think this is the first day I'm going to vote, or the first year I'm going to vote, well, they still can. As long as they're eligible to vote within the state of Delaware, there's nothing stopping them. And yes, that's a huge victory. And I might seem overly excited about it, but it's a good one. Secondly, I really want to focus on the early voting period. So this is also the first year that Delaware will introduce early voting, and already did during the primary elections earlier this month, and will again ahead of the general election. This year, early voting in the general election opens on Friday, October 28th, and runs for the 10 days up until the November 8th election. Now, designated early voting sites are different than your election day voting place. So you can visit ivote.de.gov, and Shweta, if there's like an action email that goes out after that.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I'll be doing a follow-up email, so I'll contact you all for your links.
Awesome. So we can definitely make sure that all of these links are included. So you're going to visit ivote.de.gov to find that designated early voting site. You can vote early at any site in your county. So if there are 4 polling places, in Sussex County for the election voting periods, the early voting periods, you can vote at any one of them. This is different for election day voting, of which you need to go to your designated election day site. So that's an important nuance just to remember, and as you spread the message about this, to tell others in your community as well. So this allows people who might work on election day. We don't necessarily always have paid time off to vote. Most people do not. And it's an incredible barrier to the ballot box. People who might work after, standard 9 to 5 working hours as well, being able to vote 10 days before, including on the weekends, opens access for, thousands. And so those are, the 2 main ways that I'd wanted to tell you about. Now, you might have heard some news around vote by mail. That's kind of in a bit of an iffy zone right now. However, a stay was just issued on the court order. Vote by mail as it stands is still applicable to the state of Delaware. We will be getting a final decision and appeal from the Supreme Court on October 5th, and early mail ballots are mailed out on October 10th. So we will know well in advance if vote by mail proceeds as it currently stands. And we at the ACLU of Delaware believe that it is entirely constitutional. The General Assembly does have the right and the authority to prescribe these voting measures as long as they apply to all eligible voters, which they do. So we're confident that this will move forward as such. And I would encourage you to keep an eye out from all communications from us, but to know that there's a stay in place and that we'll move forward, as it stands right now. So that's kind of all I have on changes to voting. But if there are any questions at the end, happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Mira. And we will take questions at the end. So thank you so much. I do want to let people know, like Mira, I don't have any environmental degrees myself. I was a teacher naturalist before. I'm just a nature lover who just happened to know about climate change and thought that's what I want to do, is educate our communities about how climate change is impacting us. And between me and you, we are solid examples that we don't have to have degrees under our belt. We just need to have passion and feel that this is what, this is what we need to do. And we all can be change makers in our own little worlds. And, there's more we can do than we think we can. So basically, so now I will want to invite Tracy Keenan from, she's a missional presbyter from Newcastle Presbytery. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. Tracy, we're so glad that you're here. Now we've talked a little bit about, why we need, as people of faith, why do we need to go and vote with our values. It's really important for us to hear from, people who are directly, working with congregations or faith leaders. To what does that mean to you, and how do you work with your own presbytery in terms of, on voting and on issue related to creation. So floor is all yours. I'm so glad you're with us.
All right, thank you. I'm Tracy Keenan, missional presbyter of Newcastle Presbytery, which means all of the Presbyterian churches that are in the state of Delaware and in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And this is my first time participating in a panel like this. So thank you very much for inviting me. In the Presbyterian church, about, I guess, maybe I think it was actually just before COVID started, maybe even several months before that. We became aware that there was an initiative that they called the Matthew 25 initiative. And basically it had three particular goals. One of them was vitalization of congregations. One of them was dismantling structural racism. And the third one was eradicating systemic poverty. And for us, all three of those things are together. You can't just say like, well, we would really like our congregation to have more life and more energy, but let's not think about any of the people who are marginalized or pushed to the edges or fighting injustice. So because you can't, those are a church that is vital is a church that cares about others. But it's also probably the more importantly is that it is inviting people to look at systems. Because so many of the times people make it a personal thing. Well, I will just recycle, or I will try to drive less, or I will learn about how not to personally be racist. I will learn how I can help people who are living in poverty. And this is inviting people to look at the bigger picture of it and to say, let's really start addressing the systems that perpetuate these things, the cycles of poverty, or perpetuate injustices in our society. I'm really glad that Lyle and Terry and Dykstra and that Marge Johnson is here, because they are all part of Newcastle Presbytery's Immigrant Justice Committee. And in the process of the work that they have been doing, largely, I don't know if you want to call it inspired, but propelled into this work by the horrendous things that we were seeing happening at the border, with families being separated, and with disregard for humanity that was occurring, and that somehow the people who were wanting very much to come into this country to have a new start were being treated abysmally, and in ways that were traumatic and life changing in terrible ways, with lasting effects. They were inspired to start this Immigrant Justice Committee. And in the process of that, I think all of us are learning lots of things, but one of them is something that I know that Interfaith Light and Power is already well aware of, and that is that the people on the margins are those who are disproportionately affected by climate change, and by the things that are put into place that foul the environment and foul the air and foul the water. And so that has become part of what the Immigrant Justice Committee is working on. When I look at our churches, our congregations, there are some of them who are involved in earth care, which I believe was begun by one of the people who began the Interfaith Power and Light, Bruce Gillette. But I know that some of the churches are really conscientious about earth care. I have also watched, much to my sorrow, I've watched congregations consider steps to do that and then back away because they were afraid. They were afraid that it would cost them more money in the long run, or that it wasn't reliable, and for reasons that just saddened me. And so I think one of the things that I value so much about the work that you're doing here and involving us in has to do with education, has to do with facts. I know that right now we're living in a time where facts are up for grabs. People make up their own facts and put them out there. I'm alarmed sometimes at what I read and hear. But for us to be able to give really solid information to our folks and to be able to, I so appreciated what Mira said about not wanting to shame or guilt people into this, but to remind people again and again that our values always have to go beyond our own comfort, that our values have to go beyond ourselves to the good, the greater good, and that in our scripture, God has a special place for the people who are struggling most, for the people who are on the margins, for the people who are suffering with poverty and injustice and oppression. And so if God has a special heart for those, then I think we need to be able to remind our folks again and again that our call is to have a heart for those folks as well, and to fight not just to change a circumstance here and a result there and something there, but to look at how we can affect the whole system. So I'm excited about this. I'm excited about the kinds of resources that you're making available for what was it, the guide to voting, the questions that we can be asking, and to encourage people to be leaning on legislators. One thing I learned researching what your organization is about is that states really matter a whole lot. It's not just the federal government, but each state has a lot of wherewithal for how they handle their own resources and their own situations of pollution. So Delaware, it's a small, cozy state. We can do a lot of leaning, do a lot of pushing. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all that you're doing, and I'm glad to be here and part of it.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And before I bring I do want to acknowledge that there are a few things that you mentioned. Delaware being a small state, Delaware is also one of the most polluted states. In fact, there's a study that just came out, and we are on the top 5 most polluted state in the entire nation. Our waterways, our air is one of the most polluted. So, we are kind of tailpipe of the country. But we also are very vulnerable state because of sea level rise. So we have a lot to lose. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to work on climate action. And I also want to comment on the immigrant issue that you touch. I know a lot of our faith communities care about our neighbors, and they care about working on some of these immigrant issues. And I do want to say that United Nations recently gave the statement that by the end of this decade, we'll have around 50 million refugees, climate refugees. Because when we see wildfires, when we see devastations like hurricanes, when we see flooding, like what's happening to Pakistan right now, like 1/3 of the country is underwater. When you see these pressures on our natural systems, natural disasters, millions of people will be, will be moving around due to climate pressure. So if we really care about migrant population, this needs to be in account for most people who care about the refugee population, because climate change is causing more and more people to be displaced from their from their homes, whether you look at Central America or Asia, anywhere. So just wanted to put it out there. And now I will call to invite our next guest. And last but not least, let me see, I just want to make sure that, all right. And last but not least, I would like to invite our last guest, Naveed, Dr. Naveed. Naveed, are you here?
Okay, I'm right here.
All right, Dr. Naveed Bakir, and I want to just put the spotlight on you. And And Dr. Naveed just told us that he is in Mecca right now. So really great place for tuning in. Thank you so much for taking our time to be part of this conversation. And it's really, really great to have perspective from different faith groups. We take our, we're very proud to be working with all different faith groups on climate issues, just because we feel that environmental protections is a common thread to all the religions, whether we are Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, whether we are Democrats or we are Republicans. The changing climate impacts us all. We all need a habitable, livable planet to take care of. So thank you so much for joining us. And I also want to share that Dr. Naveed is also a part of the school district. What is the title of the meeting?
Member of the Board of Education.
Board member of the school district. So I want you to highlight those smaller elections that are core to our community. Sometimes we always think about these big elections, in election year, but we forget about the smaller elections and midterms, which are equally crucial for people to go out and vote for. So now I'll stop speaking and I will give the floor to you, Naveed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So we do things in our lives sometimes for the sake of doing them, so that we can tell our hearts that, okay, I've done my part, or we can do them that actually makes a difference. So all these initiatives are awesome that we have heard tonight, and I'm sure there are others that we may not have heard tonight. However, when it comes to impacting elections, we have to understand that every election is a local election. All politics is local politics. And without understanding local politics, we cannot achieve the goals. We may put in an effort, but we won't be able to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So, for example, understanding how elections work. So, for example, in the state of Delaware, I'm going to make a very bold statement here. In the state of Delaware, your vote does not count. Your vote does not matter on November, whatever date it would be, that Tuesday. Your vote does not matter for any of the elections in 90% of the cases. And the reason I say that is because, look at presidential election. When was the last time somebody voted for a Republican candidate for president and won in the state of Delaware? That does not happen. And when was the last time you actually heard campaign ads? No one running for presidential election wastes money in Delaware because they know Democratic candidate is going to win regardless. So general election is not the time to spend effort on for any campaign related effort in the state of Delaware. If you want to make a difference, that in Delaware, 90% of the time, the election is decided with the primary election. So if we put an effort into this and we wanted to have an impact, we should have done all these things that are planned for the general election for this primary election last week. We should have done all of this already, because whoever has won the primary election in the state of Delaware, this election cycle, you cannot change the results of the election. We can predict, who's going to win the general election. In most cases, the opposing parties don't even appoint nominate candidates for some of those seats. So, for example, in the city of Wilmington, I don't even recall when was the last time when a Republican candidate for mayor was even appointed. So usually 4 or 5 guys, would run for the mayor of Wilmington, a city. There are 70,000 residents. Out of those 70,000 residents, only about half of them are registered voters, about 35,000 of them. Off of them, Republicans are 1/3. So Democrats number 2 to 1 in the city of Wilmington. So about 12,000 people vote in the primary election. If there are 4 candidates and you evenly split, if you evenly split votes among the 4 candidates, each candidate ends up with about 3,000 votes. And whoever gets a few more votes than the other candidates becomes the mayor. So a mayor in the city of Wilmington with a population of 70,000 people can actually become a mayor with about 3,000 people, 3,000 votes, excuse me. So we can do all our efforts, for the general election, but the general election is already decided in September in the state of Delaware. So this conference that we're having today, this meeting that we're having today, we should have had this meeting at least a month ago. So to have an impact, to go out and meet with the candidates, the primary election candidates, and choose the right people within that primary election. So for the state of Delaware, we are already too late. However, I hope that now that we know for future years, we would be able to have these types of meetings beforehand for the primary election, and really have an impact. And that happens across the state, across the country. Red states are going to be red, blue states are going to be blue. There are few swing states. That's where all the money is spent. That's where all the effort is spent by all major parties, all the influencers, all the PACs spend their money. They run ads. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are not one of them. However, we still have the primary elections where we can really, for example, if we wanted to do something in the city of Wilmington, the right time would be the primary election in helping put out the word about which candidate supports what kind of policies, even if they all belong to the same party, because I don't think there was any Republican primary election, in the city of Wilmington for mayor. So if we can understand the local politics, how it works, that would go along. And I say all of this because I'm the only immigrant American elected official in the state of Delaware so far. I've learned these things by going through the process of running campaigns, running a campaign for my election, and understanding and focusing on who votes and when the votes matter and when votes do not matter. So, for example, when I was running my campaign, I have 124,000 voters, registered voters in my district. However, I only knocked about 3,000 votes, and I've won by the largest margin of victory in this election, in the school board election ever in the Christina School District, with the highest number of votes within Christina. So how did I focus on those 3,000 people? Because I knew and I understood how elections work for school district. Had I not done that, I would just be putting much posters and signs on the road, trying to reach people who would not vote. So data and understanding the system is extremely important. So I hope that gives a little food for thought for the participants and the panelists here, so that we can really make a difference in the coming election cycles.
Thank you so much, Naveed. Great perspective. A lot of time we do think about the main election and forget about the primary. But in any case, I think we still need to go out and vote for the primary election, and but not forget the primaries and our local elections for schools. I do want to re-emphasize that we are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we want people to go out and vote with their values for the right candidates who have their priorities correct, who can understand, who are on the same side of for our planet, for our immigrant population, or or however views you have for the reproductive freedom for women. But it's definitely important to vote with your values and vote for the right candidate. We don't want to tell you which candidate to go vote for, but vote for somebody who can stand with all these values. Mira.
Yeah, Shweta, if I may just offer another perspective as well. Completely agree in the sense that the primary election is incredibly important in a state like Delaware. But I don't want to understate the fact that winning an election, whoever you support or whichever candidate you support, is necessarily always the end goal. Our votes go a long way in pushing certain policies and objectives further up the agenda as well. So, if a candidate that you support unfortunately loses the election, that's not necessarily to say that your vote didn't go far in pushing a certain policy further up or catching notice of the candidate who did end up winning and saying, a disturbing amount of my constituency doesn't necessarily agree with me. Yes, they might still win. Yes, they might still hold that seat for the upcoming election, but it can act as a political awakening as well to kind of say, okay, you know what? 40% of my constituency voted along this line. And even though I'm still in office, maybe I should be tuning into what they're saying if I see my political lifeline kind of hanging by a thread here. So I definitely do want to state the importance of not always looking at the election as a win or lose situation, but as a way to tell people who represent us, to remind them that they do represent us and they have to start listening. So regardless of whether they stay in office or not, regardless of whether the candidate that you had hoped to stay in office or to enter office remains there or enters or not, it's still a way for you to put issues that matter to you at the forefront of the conversation and get people who are representing you on the record regarding where they stand about that as well. I want to emphasize too that Delaware kind of has an interesting general election this year. We went through a redistricting process. So we've opened up some brand new districts that previously didn't exist, as well as a lot of retirees. So we have quite a few current representatives who will not be running for re-election in the general. And that opens up about 4 or 5 districts that are currently swing districts, and we're not really sure which way they're going to go. So that's just, something to keep in mind ahead of the election, that yeah, primary cannot be understated. And Naveed is absolutely correct in that right. But to ensure that, it's not always a win or lose.
And I agree. I agree. Let me give you one concrete example. A few years ago, there was election for the congressional seat in the state of Delaware, and I personally got too much involved with one of the candidates. Community got involved. We raised a ton of money. Almost 15% of the total budget for that candidate came from very, very small community that is not even 1% of Delaware's population. And the candidate lost. However, the visibility that our community got out of that election was just matchless. The candidate who ended up winning became very good friends with the community and knew that this community's got resources and when they support a candidate, they go all out in it. So I agree with you that is also a perspective to be kept in mind.
Thank you. And I see one hand up. Sally, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, just back to this primary versus general election point. There certainly are areas in Delaware where the primary is it. It's all about the primary. But I live in a district where there weren't any House primaries. So the general election is it for our House. And the same for the Senate. I'm redistricted, but my former district Senate candidate, no primaries, but a challenger. So that's all I wanted to say. It's really important to keep voting.
Right. So let me add another thing. So for federal election, our votes in the general election may not matter as much. Even for statewide election, it may not matter. There may be certain districts where it may not matter. However, there will still be pockets. So that's why I emphasized on understanding local politics, that all politics is local. So as long as you understand, you might still find pockets where a few more votes may change the balance, at the end.
Thank you. If I don't know, Gerald, do you see any other questions here that were in the chat that we missed?
I'm looking now, but I believe we have it all covered.
Okay, well, I have a question from Mira. So Mira, I know ACLU doesn't have a defined focus on climate. And so when, as you educate people, are you kind of doing any forums on candidates on, what is the candidate standing? I know that in PA, we have conservation voters who are ranking candidates on how they stand on climate issues. Do you have anything in Delaware where people could go and check a candidate's record before they vote on how they stand on some of these environmental issues?
Totally. That's a really good question, Shweta. And yes, there are numerous issues as important as climate change that the ACLU does not, unfortunately, have, or I should say the ACLU Delaware and not national, have a set stance on. Hopefully we'll be one day, at staff capacity where we can have a stance on all of those issues and campaigns. But in our current set, we are relying on creating partnerships like our partnership with IPL or like our partnership with other organizations like Votamos, for example, who help lead our immigrants' rights work, to really give organizations that are already invested in the work the platform to then speak on behalf of it, with the ACLU really just being the facilitator. I think at the end of the day, our voting campaign really functions to uplift rather than to, always hold the microphone. So for right now, you can actually, I'll drop the link right here for you. Visit votedelaware.org to read candidate responses. Unfortunately, we do not have climate change outlined in that, but what we do hope to kind of invest more energy into ahead of the general election is by hosting things like candidate forums where we can get candidates on the record and relying on our partner organizations like IPL to craft those questions for us. We don't have a stance on it. We don't have a campaign on it. And so we shouldn't be the ones creating the questions behind it. We should be relying on our partners who do dedicate their work and energy to those issues. And so hopefully, and I encourage everyone to keep an eye out for what those efforts actually manifest, as we're kind of in the process of reorganizing after our primary, looking at where the districts currently lie and where there's potential for change. But then we will be releasing our efforts shortly so you can keep track of where they stand.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to, I know Peggy is here and she is involved with the League of Women Voters, and maybe between League of Women Voters, IPL, and ACLU Delaware, we could do some candidate forums like that and put some candidates to test and ask them some, some good questions. So maybe that project can be taken for maybe next year sometime, but definitely. That's true. Is there any last thoughts from all you speakers? Maybe we can go around if there are any last thoughts from you that you want to share, unless we have any questions from any of the attendees, we can take that. I don't think any more questions. So why don't you, Tracy, maybe we can start with you if you have any final thoughts to close us and that just stood out to you. And
I can simply say that this has really, really been a beautiful time together, because I've just learned a lot of things, and I'm eager to share those. Particularly like what Naveed was saying about voting, because I think a lot of people do tend to think of the general elections as being the big ones, the important ones, and not necessarily putting their energy into the primaries, not seeing them as being important. Also, I love the possibility of seeing panels where particularly our state candidates are asked questions about this, so that we might really be able to say, get educated, learn what the issues are, and vote. As somebody else said, all of us, no matter which party we belong to, we live on the same planet. So I learned a lot. I really enjoyed hearing from everyone. So thank you for including me. Thanks.
thank you, Tracy. Mike, do you have any closing thoughts to share with us?
Thanks, Shweta. Just one, and it's a word of encouragement. I love the energy here tonight. So you've got Delaware IPL, a faith-based organization, hosting this. Mira did a fabulous job representing ACLU, a secular organization. I love the energy of faith-based and secular organizations partnering together. And I think it leads me to my word of encouragement for all of you out there in faith communities. Part of my story is I used to work on staff of a local United Methodist church, and I'm based in Florida. And I know from example that sometimes it is common for those of us who work in faith communities of all faiths to kind of feel like we should do things. And one way I hear this in the Faith Climate Justice Voter Campaign is a faith community wants to do voter registration, but they'll say, well, we think everybody here is registered to vote. I think that's a big opportunity to partner with other organizations, faith-based and not faith-based, to go out together, do the work together, and not feel like you need to do it yourself. Lean into each other's strengths, learn together, have fun together. It's great civic engagement, but it's just great bridge building. So that's my encouragement, is partner with other folks.
Thank you, Mike. And I already see that. I think with ACLU Delaware and our faith community network, we can definitely partner and maybe get League of Women Voters. I'm saying again, but get them on board and really work, because there are certain strengths that we have, of our network, and then there's certain strength that ACLU Delaware will have and League will have, and then we can get the voices together. I think there's really crucial role faith communities can play in educating people on environmental issues, and then going out and vote So thank you so much for sharing all those resources. Mira, any last thoughts?
Sure. Thank you again, Shweta and IPL, for organizing this. I think Mike said it really well, that it's amazing to get diverse organizations to come together because we do all live on the same planet. So it should be a conversation that we can all have together and that we should all have together. So thank you. I appreciate that. I'm also here as a resource if you are Delaware based, if you'd like to reach out and partner with us. As I said, we're working with IPL because it's not something that we cover within our bandwidth. So if you are within an organization that you feel is not represented within our current ACLU platform, do reach out to me so that we can partner. I'd love to uplift your work. We can't obviously all do it all. Nobody can, no matter what part of no matter what organization you're in. So all we can do is work together and uplift each other's causes. So happy to be that resource for you. I also just want to understate that, Naveed did an excellent job of pointing out the importance of local elections. And I want to bring that up again. You can actually head to the Delaware Department of Elections and look at the primary election results broken down by votes and see that there are some competitive races that were decided by 90 votes or 24 votes. We saw, RD13, a new candidate, Deshauna O'Neill, topple an incumbent with 24 votes. So that really, just speaks to how important local elections are and how such low levels of participation make your vote so important and can actually end up pushing a candidate who supports the issues that you care about further up into a national platform. Local elections often act as launching pads into higher offices as well. So if you love a candidate, this is a great way to throw support behind them and hopefully help watch them move up the ladder. We often see local elections leading the way for movements that then make it to national scales. So whether, you may or may not feel that these primary or general elections are successful, to whoever you support. And I'll outline again that the ACLU does not, endorse or oppose the candidates, but you may feel that you align more closely with one than the other. And this is an excellent way for you to not only help see them into higher office, but also pave the way for a movement that could then be replicated on a national scale. So that's all for me.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Mira. We really look forward to working with you, and I will be following up with your resources and everything that has been discussed here, all the links. And last but not least, Naveed, do you have any last thoughts that you want to share? Looks like everybody appreciated your perspective of, of really paying attention to the primaries.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for hosting this, arranging this. And to Mira's point, that candidate that won by 24 votes in the primary election is going to win by hundreds of votes in the general election. So those 24 votes were more important than the general election. So understand the local politics.
Oops. Thank you so much. I think this has been such a great conversation, and I hope we can have more of these conversations. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us tonight. I think we are wrapping up in time. A big thank you to all you speaker panelists for joining us. I learned a lot, and please, whenever you can, join us in our climate conversation. We try to do it monthly, sometimes twice. And stay in touch. And I think our planet, our Mother Earth, needs each one of us to stand with her. So, so hopefully you can join us within our effort. We do a lot of these climate education forums, so join us where you can. And we thank you for all your effort. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.